As beautiful as it is, Iceland is also an amazing wildlife destination. This video is about Iceland's beautiful and unique wildlife from my trip there in May 2025. This is my second video on European wildlife. Thank you so much for watching it. And there's going to be at least 2 more on Europe's amazing wildlife coming up. So do subscribe to my channel if you want to follow along. My wife and I, we spent 13 days in Iceland in May 2025. We drove over 3,000 kilometers and we saw some of the most incredible natural escapes I've seen, some that I wouldn't even be able to imagine if I hadn't seen them there. So on that front, Iceland lived up to the hype. It is by far one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. But the one thing that's almost always ignored is Iceland's wildlife. It's spoken of as if it's accidental to the main agenda. But what we realized is with a little bit of planning and a little bit of thinking through on how much time you're going to keep aside for it while you're building your main itinerary, you can have a great wildlife experience in Iceland as well. Because the thing about Iceland's wildlife, be it puffins or seals or the whales, including orcas, or the many birds that we saw there, they're all fairly widespread across the island. But in order to sort of experience them well, you will need to set aside time while you're planning for your entire trip, because you don't want to find out about a puffin cliff being only 2 hours away from where you're staying, but you're not having the time to go, drive 2 hours, spend a little bit more time there and come back. So the point is, even though you may not travel to Iceland just for its wildlife, by thinking about the wildlife experiences that you can have while planning your itinerary, Iceland can actually be a great wildlife holiday. So it's important that you make the time and space for this, because this is not something you'll be able to go there and then figure out, as I learned in a few places as well. So this video is in 3 parts. The first part is about our itinerary in Iceland, and like I said, that is inseparable from the wildlife experiences. The second part is all about Iceland's incredible wildlife, the best places to see them, some ideas on planning and how you can make the most of it along with your main plan. And the last part is about general tips to Iceland if you're traveling for the first time from somebody who went there for the first time. There's a lot of videos online about this and they're all very useful, but I felt that some of these things that I very strongly felt weren't covered in that. So I'm sharing that with you for what it's worth. So do watch till the end for some of these tips. So our itinerary was as follows. So we landed in Keflavik on an afternoon. Keflavik is where the international airport is. It's about an hour away from Reykjavik. As soon as we landed, we picked up our rental car. We then did some groceries and we checked into a hotel in Keflavik. We went back to Reykjavik only at the very end of our trip. So our plan was to just check into Keflavik and immediately start off the exploration of Iceland, only to come back to Reykjavik towards the very end of the trip. The next morning, we drove along a very popular route called the Golden Circle, stopping at Thingvellir Park, the Kerrit Crater, the really famous geyser, and the Gullfoss waterfall, probably the best known waterfall in Iceland. For me, the geyser was the highlight of the day, and it was raining on and off. And by the time we got to Gullfoss, though it was crowded, we were able to see a rainbow and I was happy with some of the shots I made there. We then drove towards the town of Holsvallur, where we booked our Airbnb for the night. The next day we started really early and went to 2 waterfalls, the Seljaland Foss and the Skogafoss. We then spent a lot of time at a not so well known waterfall called the Foss. We were the only ones there when we got there. It was really quiet. There were a lot of gulls nesting and the water was falling off a small canyon. It was really nice and quaint and we had a great time there. We then stopped for lunch and then drove to Eider for puffins. We spent the afternoon at Eider and then at the Reynisfjara Black Sand Beach. Later that evening, we stopped at the Fjardragjufor Canyon. I'm so sorry, I'm going to be messing up some of these names, so I'll spell them out there. And we then drove to a hotel, Adventure Hotel Gearland in Kirkjubø. The next day, day 4, was really mad with over 10 hours of driving. First, we drove from our hotel to Skaftafell, where we had a glacier hike booked at the Vatnajökull Glacier. This lasted all morning It was one of the highlights of the trip for me. I would highly recommend this glacier hike. Soon after, we drove to a place near the Diamond Beach for a lagoon ride to sort of experience the Jokulsarlon Glacier up front. This is also the first time in the trip that we were able to see seals. Was again a great experience overall. And then we drove for over 300 kilometers to Eagle Starter, which is where our Airbnb was for the night. The next morning, we started from Eagle Starter, did a small hike at a canyon called the Jokulsarlon Fjord, went to 2 more waterfalls, Dedifoss and Selfoss, and then drove to Miverton for the night. This is also the day that we ran into rain, proper rain, and weather warnings for the first time. So day 6 at Miverton was entirely washed out. We planned to visit Mount Krafla, we planned to visit the Thrones Peninsula for Puffins, but there was a snow blizzard and we were stuck indoors. We just waited for the weather warning to change from orange to yellow so that we could drive to Akureyri, our next destination. We just wanted to get there as safely as we could. And in some way it helped because this was also the day that the IPL final was on and I could watch RCB beat Kings 11 Punjab to win their first IPL. So yeah, not so bad. The next day, weather was still bad. We could drive, so we drove to Husavik where we booked whale watching, but that was cancelled. We then tried to drive up to the Thrones Peninsula for Puffins. That road was still blocked. So we just got back to Akureyri and sort of roamed around the streets of Akureyri and spent the rest of the day not doing anything else outdoor. On day 9, the weather continued to be bad, but the kind folks at Husavik had given us like a coupon in lieu of cancellation at another whale watching, which is close to Dalvik, and they said that it's likely that's going to run. So we checked out of Akureyri early, went to Dalvik, went on the whale watching tour, saw whales, and then continued towards Ísafjörður for the rest of our trip, which was mostly the western fjords from now onwards. So you'll notice that we didn't do too much of the eastern fjords and kept a lot more time for the western fjords because from whatever I've read, the west is generally better for wildlife. Most of the good wildlife watching experiences, be it puffins, be it whales, be it the foxes, they were all better off in the western fjords, so we kept a lot more time for that part. So after whale watching near Dalvik, we drove to Skagafjörður Valley where we stopped at a horse farm, and then we drove to Blönduós. Blönduós was an important pit stop for us for 2 reasons. One, it would have been a really long drive all the way to Ísafjörður. We wouldn't have been able to do Akureyri to Ísafjörður in a day, and it will just be driving, so we didn't choose that option. And we also wanted a place near Hvammstangi, which is the seal capital of Iceland, so that we could explore seals. So Blönduós worked well for us. So next morning, we checked out of Blönduós, went to the Koluglufur Canyon. We then drove to Vitsekur for seals. We did find a huge colony of seals there, which is great. We spent most of the afternoon watching seals there, and we drove to Ísafjörður via Hvammstangi and Holmavik because we also wanted to stop at another place called Little Bear for seals, and that also turned out to be a great stop. We'd given ourselves a couple of days at Ísafjörður, mostly for the wildlife. On our first day there, we drove to Sudavik and we did a long hike looking for Arctic foxes. We came back and photographed Arctic terns and ducks. On the next day, which is day 11 of our trip, we checked out of Ísafjörður and drove further west towards Latrebjerg for puffins. On day 12, we checked out of Latrebjerg and drove to a point where we had to take the Baldur ferry that would drop us off at Stykkishólmur. From there, we drove to a place called Grundarfjörður, which just happened to be behind Kirkjufell, one of the most popular iconic spots in Iceland, and thanks to that I was able to spend so much time there and make some good shots I'm really happy with. The next morning we drove towards the Oslavik Harbour for whale watching, specifically orcas. We did see orcas there. We then made stops at Helisandur, Saxhall Crater, Helna's Ark, and lastly Ytri-Tunga for seals, and it was an amazing stop. We then drove to Reykjavik where we spent a couple of days there before flying back home. And to have gone through this entire journey like a bullet train, each of these days could be a 30-minute video because there's so much to see and so much to photograph at every single place that we went to. But that's not what this video is about. This video is all about Iceland's wildlife. Atlantic puffins were at the very top of my list. They're one of the most beautiful birds and they have the most colorful beaks I've seen in any bird. In spring, which is around April, they congregate on cliffs by the sea to nest. Their nests are essentially burrows in like grassy patches on cliff tops. Iceland has about half the world's population of puffins, so they are quite abundant all over the island. You can see them, but photography is a little more challenging. This is because puffins are most active at dusk and at dawn, and in summer, which is May, which is when I was in Iceland, dusk is at 11:30 p.m. and dawn is at 2:30 a.m. So you want to be there at those times to photograph puffins. The rest of the day, they're either at sea catching fish or they are inside their burrows, so you can't really see them, and the light's not that great either. So while you can see them if you go to a puffin colony during the day, in order to make good photos, you want to be there at dusk or dawn. Now, puffins are widespread across the island. I'll just throw up a map right now where you can see where all they're found. They're easily found in all of these places. But then you want to make sure that some of these places are on your main route. They're a part of your itinerary in Iceland, and you want to keep in mind a couple of things. Firstly, some places are proper islands, like Grimsby. So you'll need a ferry from mainland to get to these places and back, so you have to apportion time accordingly. A lot of these islands are also really small, so they don't allow people to land on them. So boat rides from some places in Reykjavik, while they get you close to an island, you really can't get off the island and walk on it. So you might still be able to see them and photograph them, but you won't have the freedom of all the angles that you can get while you're on foot photographing puffins. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. And I think if you're a photographer, you might want to be on the ground and photograph them, because these are really bold birds. You have the freedom to create the angles you want, the scapes you want, and choose the backgrounds you want with some of these birds at least. So it might be useful for you to think about a place where you can actually get out on the ground and photograph them from the ground while you're there. So of all these places, I had 3 on my list that I wanted to visit: Dyrraley, Trones Peninsula, and Latrebiak. Of these, we couldn't drive to Trones because, like I mentioned, we ran into weather there. But I did spend a fair bit of time at Dyrraley and Latrebiak. The thing about Dyrraley is that it's close to Wick, a fairly well-known town, and it has a bunch of other popular places nearby, like the Reynisfjara Black Sand Beach. It's likely to be on your list when you go to Iceland. But the not so good thing about Dyrraley is that it shuts at 7 p.m. And at 7 p.m, it's fairly harsh sunlight. Latrebiak, on the other hand, was absolutely spectacular. It didn't have timings. I went there around 10 p.m. and it's about a 60-minute drive from the hotel we stayed in, which is Hotel Latrebiak. On Google Maps, again I'll share this link, look for the westernmost point on Iceland, drive down to that, and there are enough boats once you get there to lead you to a walking trail along a cliff. So this cliff also happens to be Europe's largest bird cliff. So all along it, you'll be able to see nesting colonies of puffins. It's probably one of the best places in Iceland to photograph the puffin, because when I was there around 11 p.m, I could photograph puffins against a snowy backdrop of Snæfellsnes, which is really good. And it's not just puffins. We were able to see a number of other birds. We were able to see razorbills. We were able to see guillemots and gulls, all in like the thousands along this cliff. So it's a really, really great birding place. Strongly recommend Latrebiak. If you're going to Iceland just for the puffins, I would recommend Latrebiak to definitely be there. And if you're a birder, I'd recommend keeping more than one evening in Latrebiak to ensure that you make the most of it. The second on my list of wildlife at Iceland were seals. So we got to see 2 species of seals in Iceland, the grey seals and the harbour seals. And we kept aside 2 sessions for seal watching, but it so happened that we were able to see them on 5 different occasions, and the last 2 were like an absolute bonus and probably better than the 2 planned sessions I had. So the most amazing seal opportunity, photographically speaking, was in the Zodiac boat ride, which was around the Jökulsárlón glacier. The boat ride is designed to take you close to the glacier and get you the best experience of the glacier. But with all the icebergs that have freshly melted off the glacier and sort of in the water, you're also able to see some wildlife, lots of birds, and there are also seals in the water and on the iceberg. It's brilliant because these boats take us quite close to wildlife, and once we're there, they shut the boats off, so the engine is off, and you can work with your angles, you can get quite low, and you can make good eye-level shots of the seal. Another slightly important note is that if you had an opportunity to shoot wildlife and you had to choose between a Zodiac boat and a slightly larger ship, even though the larger ship comes with better amenities, like maybe a washroom inside, maybe a place to shelter you from the cold if it gets too cold, I'd always opt for the Zodiac because the Zodiac is better from a photography perspective. It gives me better angles, it takes me closer to wildlife, and in general, that's what I'll optimize for. The second and the last planned opportunity that we'd set aside for seals was at Humpback. Now, Humpback is known as the seal capital of Iceland. We had booked our Airbnb at a place called Blondos, which is quite close to that. We couldn't book any seal watching tour there, but we did read up on the places where we could explore, especially by ourselves. And we read about a place called Vistekur, which is on the route from Blondos to Humpback, which had a big seal colony. So we stopped there, and the place turned out to be absolute gold. I think we saw a seal colony excess of 100 seals there. In case you want to go there, look for Vistekur on Google Maps. Look for the parking there. Once you park your cars there, you'll find a walking path. The path leads to the Fjara beach, but you want to walk on the opposite direction towards the direction of Osar. And once you start walking in the opposite direction, you'll get to a small hill. You climb down that hill, you get to a beach, and as you walk along the beach, you should be able to see a seal colony. When we were there, there's no one else there. It was just us and about 100 seals in front of us, and also a great setting because there's a snowy mountain in the background, seals in front. I think it was a mixed sort of group of harbor and grey seals. I'm not very good at identifying the two. And if seals are high on your list in Iceland, you could consider this place as a second option. I will come to what the first option is in just a bit. Now, these are the two seal places that we had planned for. One was the Zodiac boat ride, and the other was Humpback. Someone also mentioned that you might want to stop at Little Bear because it's also got a good seal watching spot, and we really didn't pay too much heed to it, but we were like, yeah, why not? Let's just stop there. It happened to be one of the most brilliant seal watching experiences of the entire trip. By the time we went there, the tide wasn't in our favor and it was quite high, despite which there were so many seals that were coming really close to us. The seals were like really swimming up close to us, checking us out, and I think we had lunch there, which was a great experience overall. So again, if you're in that area, keep a couple of hours aside to watch seals at Little Bear. Totally worth your time. The next place we saw seals was at the Red Sand Beach at Rowdy-Sandor. We kept some time there on our drive from Ísafjörður to Latrabjarg, but I wouldn't rate that very highly because the seals were really far away, and even to get to see them, you need to walk along the sandy beach for over an hour, and you need the tide to be favorable and the seals to be there. So compared to the two places that we already saw seals in, this doesn't come really close to that experience overall. If you want to go to the beach, that's great, but just for seals, wouldn't recommend it. Now, the last place we saw seals, which is an absolute must stop if you're keen on seals in Iceland, is a place called Ytri-Tunga near Snæfellsnes. We made a stop here while driving back to Reykjavik. Again, we had not really hoped to see a lot here, but as it turns out, even here the tide wasn't favorable, but the seals were really close by. They were within maybe 4 or 5 feet of us. There's a beach along which you can walk, and all along the beach we could see seals in the water. At the end of sort of the walking trail, as the beach ended, we saw seals in water, unwilling to get into deeper water even as the tide arose. So it was quite nice overall, and I think I made the best photos of seals from this outing. So yeah, Ytri-Tunga should be on your list if you want to watch seals in Iceland. Now, moving to the next animal on my list, whales. We saw two species of whales, Humpback whales and the Orcas or killer whales. We set aside a lot of dates for whale watching, and it came in handy. Húsavík is the whale watching capital of Iceland. It's near Akureyri. That's the main reason why we stayed at Akureyri. We booked a RIB speedboat from Gentle Giants at Húsavík. Unfortunately, that was one of the days with a lot of weather warning, and all whale watching trips from Húsavík were cancelled, and they were likely to be cancelled for the next 3 or 4 days. So our backup days also did not really help us there. We were then offered an alternate tour the next day from another company near Dalvík. Dalvík worked well for us because it was in the direction of travel after we checked out of Ísafjörður, so we made a stop there. And when we went there, they were continuing to offer tours even though the weather was still quite bad. But it was really uncomfortable. It was very wet and really cold. But the good thing is we did see our first whales that day. We saw 2 humpback whales in that trip, so that worked out really well for us. Now, The general understanding between Husavik and Dalvik that was offered to me by the folks at Dalvik is as follows. Husavik is a lot more into the open sea and therefore more whales. But since it's so open, it also gets a lot of weather and a lot of rain. And when it rains, the seas get really rough. Dalvik is more sheltered. So even when there is a lot of wind and a lot of rain, the sea isn't as rough as it is in Husavik. So these guys continue to run their boats. So that's something you might want to keep in mind the next time you go there and you run into a bit of weather. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you're able to go from Husavik and see a lot more than just humpback whales. But if you can't, then there's always Dalvik, where the tours are less likely to get cancelled if the weather's bad. But the planned whale watching experience wasn't the most memorable one that I had. We were driving from Sudavik to Isafjordur, and out of the blue, we saw two humpback whales in a fjord, in the narrowest fjord one can imagine, like 10 minutes away from the town of Isafjordur. You'd think that you have to go far into the sea to be able to see whales, but here we were. While we were driving from one town to another, we just stopped our cars by the side of the road, watched the whales for as long as they hung out, and it was a totally brilliant moment. Our next stop for whales was at Olavsvik, where we stopped specifically for Orcas. There's a company called Lucky Tours who offer whale watching tours focused on killer whales, and it happened to be a really great experience. Less than 10 minutes into the sea, we saw a small pod. A little later, we saw a larger pod. It was an amazing sighting because they were so close to our ship at times, sometimes being under it as well, and they were going about their business hunting fish. And it was a really beautiful setting because we could photograph the killer whales against the backdrop of Snæfellsnes, and I made some shots that I'm really happy with. So yeah, here's some footage and some photos of killer whales from the Olavsvik harbor. The next on my list is the Arctic fox. We kept aside 2 days at Isafjordur for this. From everything I've read, the Hornstaden National Park is the best place to see these foxes. Unfortunately, the planned trip to Hornstaden that I'd booked got cancelled. Not sure why that happened. And we couldn't find a suitable ferry time that could sort of take us to Hornstaden, where we could spend a few hours and then come back. So we went for a hike instead in Sudavik. We spent about 8 hours in the hike. We could not see the Arctic fox there. But that being said, on our drive back from Latterberg towards the ferry, we saw an Arctic fox by the side of the road. By the time I could park my car, get down and get a photo, he'd gone really far away. But we did see him, and I do have a record shot for what it's worth. That apart, we saw a lot of birds. The Eider ducks were actually quite common. They are an iconic bird species in Iceland. They nest in colonies close to the sea, and these nests are covered in Eider down, which is a very light and very warm down feather, and therefore it's probably one of the most expensive, one of the most premium down feathers you can find, exorbitantly expensive. So there's a lot of farmers who go and collect the Eider down once the nesting season's done. It's a highly protected bird in Iceland, probably for that reason. We saw Eider ducks in a number of places. We saw nesting colonies, we saw adults with ducklings, we saw just adults by themselves. And it's quite common, so you don't have to set aside a separate slot or day to do this. Every time you're looking for seals or puffins or even whales, you might be able to find a place where Eiders are nesting or Eiders are just hanging out. You can get quite close to them and be able to make some good photos and videos. We also saw Arctic terns. They're famous for the longest migration from the North Pole to the South Pole and back. They were nesting here when we were there. They were common along the Western Fjord region. We saw them nesting in a bunch of places in Isafjordur, in Sudavik and in Latterberg. And it's quite easy to photograph them, but you want to keep your distance because they can be quite aggressive when they're nesting. The other bird that was really common was the oyster catcher, fairly common along big roads. Saw it along the ring road also a few times. So if you do stop somewhere for a break or for lunch, it's likely you might find oyster catchers nearby. Take the time to photograph them because the ones I saw here were quite bold and I was able to make some good photos and videos. So yeah. So you see all of this wildlife in a trip that wasn't really about wildlife. So it is quite possible to see a large number of birds and animals. It's quite possible to make some good photos, and For this, you need to pack in a few additional days, and you need to do this while you're planning the trip for the reasons that I explained. So yeah, let me know if you want help planning a trip to Iceland. Let me know if you want to sort of think through where you want to stop for wildlife or not. Happy to help you with that. And now on to the last part of the video, which is about a few general suggestions about Iceland, which I would have found useful had somebody told me about it before I went there. The first is that the drive is the main event in Iceland. You must enjoy driving, you must enjoy being driven around because it's so beautiful and there's so many places, and you're always getting from one place to another. Not to say that it's not slow, not to say that you're always in a hurry to get from one place to the other. Iceland is slow. It's not slow in the sense of sitting in a cafe and watching the world go by kind of slow. It's a different kind of slow. It's slow in the sense that you're driving and every few minutes you find something so beautiful that you want to spend the next 2 hours there, and every now and then you take the time out to do it. It's that kind of slow, and therefore you need to enjoy driving. You need to sort of not be in a hurry to get from one place to the other. You need to give yourself the time to absorb the amazing natural beauty that just keeps coming at you as you drive, and that's very, very important. Also, Iceland's not really a place where you can be based in one town and city and explore the area. It's all about exploring the outdoors. It's all about making the most of the time outdoors. It's about the hikes. It's about going to places that are beautiful. It's about, making the most of the really amazing landscapes there are. So you're always moving on from one place to the other. The second thing, and maybe it's because I've always thought about a non-wildlife holiday in this way, is to not plan a day in terms of meals. Most non-wildlife holidays, I'm thinking of, I do breakfast, then I do some things, I do lunch, then I do some things, then I do dinner. The thing about Iceland is that apart from the fact that eating out is so expensive, some of the best meals we had were not at restaurants. They weren't at places that were on Google. Like we had lunch at Little Bear and Tritonga while seals were swimming around us. While driving from Sudavik to Isafjordur, we had lunch on a picnic table with the most amazing view of the fjords around us, right? And this is how you want to think about your meals in Iceland, that you're always driving from some place to the other and you come across some really, really amazing place where you can stop. So plan a day in terms of the places you want to get to. Have some food ready to eat or anything you can carry from a grocery store, and make the most of your time outdoors, because what we realized is that time indoor comes at the cost of things that you can do outside, including having a meal. So choose your meal locations wisely and don't plan your entire day based on where you're going to eat what. If you have an itinerary like ours, where you're sort of going around the island, think about whether you want to invest in Airbnbs at all, because in most of the places we went to, there were really good campsites nearby, and we booked expensive Airbnbs that we just checked into at night and checked out in the morning. Really didn't make the most of the Airbnb, which offered so much more. So the next time I'm going to Iceland, I'll be doing a good mix of campsites, maybe staying in Airbnbs or hotels only in places like Akureyri or Reykjavik, where there's an opportunity, but everywhere else maybe use campsites, because not only are they clean and nice, they're also really close to attractions, so you're spending that much less time getting to a place. The next one is actually a fairly common thing that everyone's spoken about, but I will still say it again because it is that important. The weather is unpredictable. So if you have a really important thing that you want to do, keep a day before or after it so that you buffer in for bad weather. And don't worry too much about what you'll do on those days, because no place like in Iceland is really too far away from like a hike or a waterfall or anything else that you can do outdoor. So what you'll do on that free day is really not a challenge there in Iceland. But if your main day does get rained out, like it did for us with respect to whale watching, you really want to have a backup day to be able to cover up for it. So the next one's an interesting one because we realized this only towards the end of our trip. Photography light-wise, the light gets better from 8 p.m. up until sunset, which is around midnight. And the crowds also start dwindling down from around that time. So what happens if you're out at that time is not only do you get emptier places, like it was at Kirkjufell for me, where I was only one of the 4 or 5 photographers at midnight making the most from the most iconic landscapes in Iceland, but it's also better photography light-wise, right? So think about how you want to spend your day. Our earlier approach was to start early and sort of wind down early, and we noticed that even when we went to some waterfalls really early in the morning, like 7 o'clock, we were the only ones there. But just for the photography aspect, I would recommend starting late and going as late as you can. Keep the middle of the day if you had to for driving from point to point, but as far as being out there is concerned, try to be out as late as you can. The next one is about where you want to stop. If you plan your itinerary like us, where you're sort of driving all around the island, it's best for you to stop really close to a place that you want to get to, for the same reason I spoke of earlier, which is that you can get there really early or you can stay there till very late. So you want to pick your Airbnbs and campsites in such a way that you can explore these places when the light's really good, as opposed to driving to this place in good light and losing out on the good light. The good light lasts a very short duration in the morning, much longer at night. So yeah, think about where you want to book them. My biggest advice is going to be to book it as close to your points of interest as possible and not midway, even if it means that you're driving for longer the previous day. This last one came as a bit of a surprise for me. Some roads are quite tricky. I mean, it's not like driving in the bush in Botswana tricky, but it's still quite tricky in the sense that these are gravel roads. They are quite steep, they are quite high inclinations, and there's a lot of hairpin bends in them sometimes. And this is especially true towards the western fjords, because driving there is very different from driving along the ring road, which is a lot more easier, a lot more smoother drive. Driving along the fjords is a little bit more harder, a lot more gravel roads, and a lot more concentration needed to be on the road. So yeah, that's that for me on Iceland in terms of our overall itinerary, the tips on wildlife, and some other general tips. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of this. Reach out to me if you want to plan your trip to Iceland. I'll share with you all the information I have. I will anyway be sharing all the details about my trip, including where we stayed, the places where we booked our trips, including whale watching, and so on and so forth in the video description. Thank you so much for watching this video up until this point.